Kako, and welcome to this seminar session of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival dealing with the value of Hawaii, Hulihia, the Turning, the new collection of essays and interventions concerning the current state of Hawaii and what we can hope for the future. My name is Craig Howes. I had the honor of being one of the co-editors with Jonathan Kamakaviva Ole Osorio, Noelani Goodyear Kaupua, and Aiko Yamashiro. And I'm also very grateful to the over 60 contributors, including some of the people you'll hear speaking today about that book. That book is open access. It is free to you and available now, and we will make sure that the link is up in the chat room for you to be able to download your own copy. They're remarkable essays, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the book before I introduce our speakers. Hulihia refers to massive upheavals that change the landscape, overturn the normal, reverse the flow, and sweep away the prevailing or assumed. We live in such days. Pandemics, threats to aina, political dysfunction, cultural appropriation, and disrespect, but also powerful surges towards sustainability, autonomy, and sovereignty. In the collection, The Value of Hawaii 3, Hulihia, The Turning, community leaders, cultural practitioners, artists, educators, and activists share their concerns and hopes for the future of Hawaii on topics ranging from malama'aina to labor, healthcare to justice, and bold new forms of economies and community life. These visions ask us to recognize what we truly value and offer a wealth of starting points for critical conversations in this time of profound and permanent change. Neil J. Kahoʻokele Hannahs is founder and CEO of Ho'okele Strategies Incorporated, former director of the Land Assets Division of Kamehameha Schools, and co-founder and director of the First Nations Futures and Hawaii Investment Ready programs. He has served on the State of Hawaiʻi Commission on Water Resources Management since 2016.
Aloha.
Kyle Kajihiro is a peace and social justice activist and lecturer in geography and environment and ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa.
Aloha.
Tai P. Kāwika Tengan is an associate professor of ethnic studies and anthropology at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa.
Aloha.
And Tatiana Kalaniʻōpua Young is a Kanaka Ōiwi Maoli, māhū, and scholar activist, and a former community organizer with the United Territories of Pacific Islanders Alliance, UTOPIA. She completed her PhD in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Washington. Kalani'opua serves on the board of Kahea, the Hawaii Environmental Alliance, and Hawaii's chapter of UTOPIA, and continues to advocate for precariously housed LGBTQI+ populations.
Well, mahalo, Craig. I really appreciate your introduction, and it's really an honor to be on this panel with others and reaching out to the attendees, the Zoom attendees, and Facebook attendees, and wherever this is showing of this conference and event. So the article, or the chapter that I wrote was entitled Ahupua'a Values Should Enlighten Next Generation Investing in Hawaii. So the notion of ahupua'a is certainly familiar to my fellow panelists, but for those who may not be familiar with it, let me share a screen and show you what that looks like. So at the very highest level, it's a land division that Hawaiians created or in their used to manage their resources that extended from the heavens to the horizon. And back when I first started at Kamehameha Schools in 1974, Marilyn Kahalevai, a very talented graphic artist, had tried to imagine it and created this very idyllic view of an ahupua'a that we then at Kamehameha, others not me, use as a curriculum tool. And they took it around the state, sharing this idea of ahupua'a and its wonder to students around the state. It's interesting, though, that even as we were sharing, even as we were teaching the next generation about this concept, I'm not sure in that moment, and think about kind of right at the start of the Hawaiian Renaissance back in the early 70s, whether we really believed it was something that was relevant to us today. You know, what you see in this picture is a lush watershed, a stream with continuous flow to the ocean. native forests, a native forest that has an evidence that there were resources in it worth gathering and that people could gather. Agroforestry plants that could be fashioned into material goods. Lo'ikalo providing the staple of Hawaiian life and really honoring our lineage back to Haloa. Mala'ai that provisioned a sustainable food system. Kauhale, this little village offering shelter for those who actually reside in the ahupua'a. A pristine ocean inviting paddlers, surfers, and fishers. Trails that provided access and created connectivity throughout the land division. And really kind of a productive presence of humanity across the landscape. So that was the Hawaiian notion. So this is a view of Hawaii. I'm not sure if it's today, but it could be. And it's a very different view. And and beyond kind of the glistening buildings and towers there, what's in that scene that may be really not that discernible is really a shrinking forest that's been overtaken by invasive species that do an inferior job of water capture and recharge. Diverted, discontinuous streams, if they exist at all anymore. Dense subdivisions of houses that are distant from employment and spiraling in value as they serve a prominent role in wealth creation and not just shelter and residency. Farmlands plowed over to house a population that is now totally reliant on imports. Virtually totally reliant. We've made some progress here. A checkerboard of development and private ownership that obscure environmental connectedness and minimize sense of place. And human activity that's really restricted to your own private property or a smattering of public places. Now my point in making the contrast is not just to have a nostalgic glorification of the past and yearn for yesteryear. I really wanted to shine a spotlight on indicators of changes in our quality of life. Declining health of life-giving natural resources, impaired ecosystems that cannot mitigate environmental trauma, and think about the sea level change and flooding that's happening and will only occur more as the sea level rises. Cultural practices that are now compromised by this new worldview, eroding community cohesion and sense of place, wealth disparity and resource depletion and poverty that raise concerns not only for us today, but about intergenerational equity. What will be the world in which our children and grandchildren must exist? So returning to my initial reference about the ahupua'a book, the question is, have we really forever changed our environment, lifestyle, and quality of existence? So the land use scenarios that you see in the original poster, in Waikiki, in this picture are a reflection of some unseen values that I think are really critical. And these unseen values guide investment. And there are values that we can reassert and use to assess the desirability of everything new that comes our way, every new idea for development or investment that comes to Hawaiʻanae. And those three things I've interpreted, we need a decoder ring. So how do we go from, our view of the ancient to something that's relevant today? And in my chapter, I lay out three things that we can look at. Investment horizon. We must guard against this notion of maximizing everything for today. Investment scope. We've got to consider the systemic impact of our behavior. Everything upstream is going to inevitably affect downstream. And investment benefit. We really need to seek a more equitable distribution of benefits. We can do this. And I think there's evidence that if you're inclined to contribute to this movement, to lend a hand, if you will, as these individuals did at the Panikapuka ceremony at He'ea Fish Pond, that one place to go is to look at the AinaAlohaFutures.com website and figure out ways to contribute to the many and weigh in on the ideas that we're trying to raise out in this new opportunity to reassert an economy here in Hawaii in the wake of COVID, and to really be a participant in that. And I think that if we do, and if we assert those three values and are vigilant in looking at investment horizon and scope and benefit, and being very critical reviewers of that, as our kupuna were, that ahupua'a poster does not need to just be a rendering on a wall of something that we've forgotten. It can really be the basis for the creation of abundance and for the resources and that will help us to thrive, both our land and our lahui to thrive.
You know, in many ways, Hawaii was a fulcrum of the building of an American empire, from a continental to transoceanic empire. Hawaiian land is used to make war. These war games that are practiced on stolen Hawaiian lands should, you know, be more appropriately thought of as pre-war, right? These are the future wars that are manifest in the present, and so they prefigure what's going to come. And so, what is the responsibility when these activities are creating so much devastation and environmental cultural damage here in Hawaii, but also where those techniques of killing and destruction are then sent over and inflicted on other peoples around the world? There's responsibilities on both ends of that. And we have some opportunities in this moment as well to address some of these problems. So one of them is, you know, the Army has leased, there's 4 leases of public trust land, i.e. the ceded lands that are technically, you know, owned by the state of Hawaii, but leased by the Army for $1 for 65 years, which are set to expire in 2029. 23,000 acres at Pohakuloa on the Hawaii Island, about 1,200 or 1,400 acres in Makua Valley, several parcels up in Kahuku, and another large parcel in Puamoho. And so right now there's an environmental impact statement underway by the Army to try to extend this lease at Pohakuloa. The court has found that the Army failed to care for the land and uphold the terms of the lease. The state has failed to enforce the terms of the lease on its tenant. And so right now the call is that the lease should end, right? And between now and 2029, the process should begin to clean up and restore these lands. Now the Army is going to push really hard and many economic interests begin to line up. But here's where the Hulihia needs to happen, I think, is to begin looking at the hard realities of what the cost is, right? These might bring short-term benefits to have this kind of military investments, but the destructions that it has caused, you know, means that some of these lands may never be usable again for anything productive, culturally sustainable, environmentally sustainable. Kaho'olawe is an example of that, where the destruction was so total that even after $400 million and 10 years of cleanup, only 1/10 of that island is actually cleaned up to a level where it's safe, considered safe for construction, right? And so this is what's at stake for a parcel in Pohakuloa anyway, a parcel that's 140,000 acres, something like that, many times the size of Kaho'olawe. The Red Hill fuel tanks are leaking. They have been leaking, and they sit 100 feet above the Halava aquifer, which supplies 25% of Honolulu's drinking water. So we have an opportunity to shut this down and protect something that we all need to live, right? The Navy's refusing to close those tanks, double line them, and the EPA and the Department of Health have rejected the latest plan that the Navy has put forward. So this is an opportunity, again, for people on Oahu, especially, to get involved. The West Lock munitions storage is a plan to expand munitions storage right near the residential areas in Kunia, in Ewa area, and without transparency or full participation. So community members there are raising their voices. And we have opportunities actually to reclaim certain lands. Lualuale in Waiʻanae, about 9,000 acres of that land. Great farmland. This is where Ma'o Farms is located. And those lands could be productive again if they came back. The lands are underutilized for military use. So this is a place that can be developed. And there's a competing visions of what could happen with those lands, right? Is it going to be growing homes? Is it going to be growing food for our communities? So I just offer these as a few examples of where there is a opportunity, a kipuka, an opening, a portal, a chance for a re-emergence and something new to come out of this moment of challenge and crisis.
So koa, the term, I think most people know it for the tree or the wood of our largest native hardwood tree, but it's also the term for warrior, for bravery, for courage. Also, in translation for military and also for soldiers. So it's partly with that dynamic and that some of that tension, right? That I wanted to use that, or we, Kyle and I both in our discussions wanted to use that metaphor of how koa as this aspect of warriorhood, courage, rooted in the aina through the actual tree, could help us to rethink the place of the military, and also with my own personal interests, those of veterans and those Hawaiians who serve in the military. I got a deeper understanding of, it's both the scarring of that shell that germinates it, but it's also the disturbance of land where the seeds are resting that also calls forward that koa to regenerate, to resprout. And in our discussions between Kyle and myself, we thought, this is really powerful for thinking about the ways in which impacts on the aina from the military, which have in some cases desecrated or destroyed sites, and also on the bodies of veterans and in their own psyches who've been scarred from war, how these two together can bring about a regeneration of new forms of warriorhood, of standing up for the land, which was something seen in Kaho'olawe, where a lot of the first activists and Aloha Aina that went there were returning Vietnam vets. It's something that one of our friends, Uncle Joe Astores, who was himself also a Vietnam veteran, but does a lot of work at Makua Valley to tell other stories of what it used to be like.
So my talk connects actually to what everyone else has been talking about, because, Pu'uhonua, a place of refuge, I wanted to talk about that within the context of a place, a person, and a thing, right? Because Pu'uhonua is one of those, it's a really powerful concept when we're thinking about regenerative histories and in thinking about how we become Pu'uhonua or how Pu'uhonua are produced. I think Pu'uhonua o Waiʻanae provides us with a really great example of how scarred people can come together, people who come from very traumatic experiences, lived experiences and histories can come together, and in that pain manifest something very beautiful and transformative and regenerative. So I'm really grateful for the lessons of, Auntie Twinkle and the women and the queer leaders of that encampment for creating a nourishing space that gave people hope, and really actually the most important thing that Pu'uhonua o Waiʻanae contributed to our lahui, to Hawaii, is just a place where people can go and talk to someone. And one of the major reasons that, we have a very serious suicide epidemic, especially among Kane. And I think it's really important that we continue to nourish Pu'uhonua, places where people feel like they can go and talk to someone, or at least have somebody to, to malama them.
In terms of what you're seeing as far as it turning in the future or whatever, to what degree is that going to be dependent on working with the existing governmental institutions, or what kind of things can you offer in terms of how we have to sort of think about the future in relation to communities? Because one of the major themes running through the book is that we've got to depend on communities. We can't depend on existing governance to basically solve the problems for us. And I know all of you are working intimately with those institutions. So I'd just like your mana'o on that.
That love at the end of the day is going to be the strongest motivator for transformation in the world. And I think it's difficult to justify it. I mean, all of this killing in the name of love. you know, and just the continued destruction of our ecologies and our climate and our relationships to Aina and to one another, using the argument that we need jobs. I mean, it's just not sustainable. It doesn't win out. I think aloha, love, empathy in the long term is definitely where we need to start investing our time, our energy, our money. And I think that's where it's at.
And so we have to engage with them at the same time that we're rebuilding our own structures, like the pu'uhonua or the ahupua'a, and having these as spaces for the regeneration of koa, and koa also defined by aloha and aloha aina, which is what we've seen in the Mauna. And we saw even, you know, these hints of what these other structures of our own could look like in the pu'uhonua, pu'uhuluhulu, in that sanctuary, which I think really importantly was located next to an ecological kipuka that generated these just amazing old growth koa trees. I'd never seen koa trees like those. And these leaves are just amazing. And the history there and the way of connecting with them, I think, and allowing them to inform what was happening at the pu'uhonua was just really beautiful and so powerful. And at the same time that people in the pu'uhonua were being savvy about how to work with the state and the National Guard, right? So it really requires that kind of agility, but also that courage to put yourself on the line and to know that it's a multi-generational struggle, right? And it's the connections across those generations in and out of these different systems. I think that is one of those keys for us being able to regenerate our lifeways. So
government to me is like, if we just put all our faith in government and its way of doing things, that's like the monocrop, where things get eroded, where it doesn't actually nourish the community. But if we have a community, then we can make the government or the structure, we can push it to work in different ways. And I guess that's where we need power that comes from the roots, literally, and to be able to make the structure more productive, more of a caring structure rather than one of discipline and punishment. So that's my initial thought. So how does like bacteria can colonize root systems and fungi can do the same? How do we colonize the system in a way that drives its functions and more productive ways than letting it determine the terms of our engagements?
I think we have to avoid some of the pitfalls of what's become known as democracy, the democratic approach. You know, where we gather everybody, create a big tent, gather everybody into it, under it, and have a hodgepodge of ideas thrown out, and we reduce ourselves to the minimum of what everybody can agree upon. Man, that to me is no way to revive a people, no way to revive our land and so forth. You know, or AOC's policies and so forth, and they want you. You know, the American politics wants you to have this kind of weird construct of compromised ideas that don't amount to anything in and of themselves. It's just, you know, kind of window dressing for each of the people under the tent. You know, and that may be a cynical view, but it's really meant to be, you know, an advocacy for looking at things with a distinct and worldview. And when I think about our culture and I think about the beauty of it and its adaptation to place and to changing conditions, for us, I mean, that's where we find it.